Good evening and welcome to Current Condition. I am Bethany Rowe. As always, I'm joined by the other Bethany, Miss Bethany Hallam, and today's special guest, Devon Taliaferro, Pittsburgh School Board Director for District 2. Both of you, welcome. How are you guys doing this evening?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We were discussing right before we started, we are all allergy sufferers, so if my eyes are leaking, I'm not crying, I swear.
Sometimes it's hard for me because I'm emotional, right? So like half is probably tears and the other half is allergy.
Is she crying or is it seasonal allergies? I don't know.
It's confusing. Nobody ever knows.
Well, Devon, thank you for joining us. Allergies and all. You're in good company because we're also hot messes with ours. So welcome. So Jake, our producer, will you pull up the cover of this week's Pittsburgh Current digital version in your inboxes as of yesterday morning? And I feel like this is a very good cover for us to have. We have Devon here because we are probably about midpoint in the show going to be talking all about Pittsburgh Public Schools. This issue focuses on how Pittsburgh Public Schools did with pandemic schooling, which again, we'll have lots to talk about there. But before we get to that, I would like us all to chat about a very important Supreme Court ruling that happened yesterday. In case you didn't know, up until yesterday, you were allowed to get fired for being gay, lesbian, or transgendered, and the Supreme Court decided that's not okay. So Bethany Hallam, let's start with you. How do you feel about the ruling? How do you feel like this is going to impact our Allegheny County residents? And in general, what are your thoughts and feelings on that decision?
Well, first of all, I think it's absurd that it took till 2020 to pass.
Thank you. I can't even to say those words, but there we are.
Yeah, and so I think the most interesting thing to me was the division of the votes in favor of this. So it was 6-3, with some of the conservative judges actually siding with the more progressive judges on the Supreme Court. So those are two of the things that I definitely took notice of. And also, I was reading some of the concurring and the dissenting opinions of the Supreme Court justices, and I was reading something that I think might have some future implications on other Supreme Court rulings in the future, because the dissenting opinion, I think it was Justice Alito. Is that it? Alito? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
A-L-I-T-O, yeah.
It's not like he's going to call you. We might have to do a correction corner if he calls you.
Correction corner, no. So he said that sex, his reason for voting against it was that sex meant something differently in 1964 than it means now, and it was just a disgusting take. But also I saw some people who were talking about in regards to Second Amendment legislation getting brought before the Supreme Court, because whenever the Constitution was written and whenever the Second Amendment was added to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that it actually, the right to bear arms, were not actually the same kind of arms that we have accessible to folks today.
Like they might have just meant these.
But like they didn't have weapons and like AR-15s and things like that. So I think that that's a really something that we should watch out for, because again, use their own words against them whenever they're trying to vote against things.
But isn't it a little bit of a slippery slope? Because the word woman is also not, I believe, anywhere to be found in the Constitution. So I mean, if you start to go back and say, well, that's not what it meant back then, couldn't we just toss the entire friggin' thing?
That's why it's so important that like we watch and we follow who's being appointed to the Supreme Court, because remember, it is the supreme law of the land. And so the fact that who's ever sitting in the White House has the authority to appoint these folks, that's why it's so important. Like, I know a lot of us aren't super excited about Joe Biden being the Democratic nominee, but do we want for 4 more years Trump to have say over who is sitting on the Supreme Court, on the supreme law of the land? So I think that's why it's really important that we follow that. I saw a lot of people say that we shouldn't wait for Brett Kavanaugh to get a statue, that we should just throw him in the river now. So that was a hot I really appreciated too.
I will sign up for that club, whatever club that is.
See if he can swim.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see, right? And then the last point that I think is really important that I personally want to make about this is just the fact that, like, make sure, like, this is a tremendous victory for our LGBTQ friends all over the country. But remember, it took till 2020 for them to have workplace protections. How long is it going to take for their actual lives to be protected, right? We keep hearing stories over and over again of especially our Black trans friends are being killed and there's no investigations going into them. And we're seeing a lot of, I know I'm going to a rally on Thursday about that, about protecting our trans friends in our community. And so if it took till 2020 just to get their rights in the workplace protected, how much longer are we going to have to go until their lives are protected as well? So that's something that we should be on the lookout for. And also, as folks who can create policy in their respective governing bodies, like myself and Devon, I think it's really important that we start really, doing a deeper dive into that and finding out what more we can do to protect our LGBTQ friends in our areas.
And that's a great segue. So Devon, over to you. What kind of protections are already in place for LGBTQ students and employees within the school district? I feel like this isn't necessarily going to impact what you guys have been doing, but how have you been following this, and what is the school district doing to protect our students and employees?
Yeah. So so disclaimer, I'm a baby school board member. I'm like 6 months old. So I'm still learning a lot about, what's already in place and even just trying to make decisions of what I can, how I can use my, I'm gonna say my powers. I don't have any powers.
Oh, your powers. Yes, it's your powers. Yes.
My voice and my ability to advocate for the things that I would like to see happen for our students. I know one of the bigger things that came up before I was on the school board was a policy that was introduced in terms of related to transgender bathrooms. And I know that was a big deal for the school district as well. I'm not 100% sure about in terms of staff and employees, but we have some incredible, staff or employees that identify as LGBTQ. And, one person in particular I can think of is Devon Brown, who works at Brashear High School, and he leads our...
I'm a Beachview. Devon, I'm a Beachview.
Yeah, and he's incredible, and he does a lot of really great work with the LGBTQ club of students, and really just pushing and helping them to use their voices and share their experiences. And so I'm a huge fan. I mean, I used to work out of Brashear High School when I worked for Big Brothers Big Sisters, so I got to see a lot of the students that I worked with. But I think there's still a lot more to be done, especially as we're having this conversation, about making sure that our students are protected and that they have, that protecting them, but we're also acknowledging, the things that they're going through, the circumstances that they're going through. I think also just being, I just remember back to when I was in school, especially even high school, it's this time in your life where you're kind of discovering who you are. And so I think that's the critical moment for a lot of our students, especially our LGBTQ students, that we want to make sure that they're supported through that time and they're transitioning and they're trying to figure out what they're going through. But, there still is a lot to be done, I think, in the district to better support students.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much true across the board. And I'll go back to what Bethany said earlier. I can't believe that it's 2020. We're just now passing this law protecting their right to work and not get fired for being who they are. But it's good to know there's people like you, Devon, on the school board that are looking out for that and making sure that our kids are well cared for. Transitioning for a quick second, I do want to talk for a minute about what's going on in Seattle because I feel like it's very interesting, and I want to get Bethany's take on this and Devon, yours too. If you haven't been following the news, there is an area in Seattle. It was formerly called Chaz. It's now called CHOP, which, Bethany, what did I say that stood for? I just told you.
Autonomous Zone.
Capitol Hill Occupy Protest. I wrote it down.
Yes,
Devon taking notes. You're going places. Yeah, the Capitol Hill Occupy Protest, formerly the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. They basically evicted the police, and this kind of all ties back to the police reform protests and things that are going on across the nation right now. And they've sort of taken over, and they're communing there. As far as I know, they don't have a centralized government or any kind of clear leadership. Bethany, from your experience as an activist, is this a way to get things done? Should Pittsburghers storm City Hall?
Well, I'm not completely against that, but I don't think this is how we should have to do it. I
Yeah.
just think that we have seen time and time again that, these minuscule reforms that a lot of our, local leaders are advocating for are not enough. Like I've been reading a lot about like the 8 Can't Wait, if anybody's familiar with that, and it's police reforms. And really the reality of it is that a lot of the police jurisdictions across the country already have the bans on the things that 8 Can't Wait talks about, and they're just not being enforced, right? So like chokehold bans, there's places where chokehold bans have been banned for decades, and yet police are still using them. What I think is most important out of Seattle right now is that the Seattle City Council just passed the legislation for the less lethal force, very similar to the legislation that we introduced at the Allegheny County Council last week. And so that's the things that I've been watching is look what this uprising is making happen. So for all the folks who are out there saying, why do you have to protest? Why do you have to create a CHOP or a Chaz? Why do you have to do this? Well, it's getting the attention of folks who weren't paying attention before. And sometimes you have to, who is it Martin Luther King? A riot is the language of the unheard. And so I think that's what, is that right?
I don't know. Let me fact check you.
Can you fact check and Jake?
What did you say? Riot is the language of the unheard?
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Hold on. According to Google, which is always super reliable and 100% right, it was MLK.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay,
you don't want to mess up.
Okay, so let's. Okay, so like MLK said, a riot is the language of the unheard, and so I think it's so important that people have avenues to get their voices heard. We hear a lot of talk about co-governing, and it's something I'm a big advocate for, where I want people's voices to be heard at the legislative table, and that's something that I try my hardest to make sure is done, because at the end of the day, it's the policy changes that we really need to make sure that the effects of these protests are long lasting, and that the changes that have needed implemented for decades, if not hundreds of years, are finally happening all across the country. And so this is just the beginning. And for anybody who's ever been on a legislative body before, it is a process to write legislation and then, get it through committee and get it passed. So I truly believe that this is just the beginning, and there's going to be a lot more coming down the line over the next few weeks and next few months of some really substantial changes happening when it comes to police use of force. I mean, we just saw at the state level 2 police reform bills were actually introduced, which is something that the House Democrats have been advocating for forever. But because the Republicans and, Mike Turzai is the Speaker of the House, which, peace out, dude. I'm so glad.
Yeah, right. Boy, I'm going to miss that guy. I'm not at all.
Yeah, so for the first time, the bills that they've been advocating for are finally being introduced. I mean, we are seeing changes all across the country at all different levels of government, and it's something that really gives me some excitement. But for the record, if we get a Chaz or a CHOP here in Pittsburgh, I can't wait to check it out.
I'm sure it'll have some kind of Yinzer name attached to it.
I hope so. I have my Yinzer shirt on. Can you see?
And I'm wearing a Pirates shirt. Bring back baseball.
Wait, it's not happening this year, Bethany. But
I know. Just stop. I'm sad enough because of my allergies. Don't make me cry more. So I was listening to NPR yesterday, and they actually had Andrew Cuomo on, the governor of New York, and they're also doing their own sweeping sort of police reform legislation. And they said, well, why haven't you done this yet? Like, you've been governor for a while, And he's like, there's never been this kind of political and public support for it before. I mean, as much as it sucks, sometimes you have to wait for, the popular opinion to support these kinds of legislation to get them passed, because otherwise people just aren't paying attention to it. So what is there any update on yours and Liv's legislation, by the way? Is it with the whatever weird ass committee they sent it to? Sorry, Jake, you have to hit the explicit button.
Oh, it is in that committee. There has not been a committee meeting scheduled to discuss the less lethal force legislation yet. But we are at the next council meeting, just announced last night that we're introducing a ban on no-knock warrants. So we have seen, especially in the instance of the murder of Breonna Taylor, how dangerous these no-knock warrants can be. There's no excuse for them.
The murderers are still at large?
Exactly. So the murderers are still at large. She has not been brought justice. And that's something that I think we need to keep pushing for. I read the other day that they had reopened an investigation. But remember, we've seen even here locally, how just because an investigation has been opened, just even because the murderers have been charged, does not mean that the victim will be brought justice. So we saw that here with the murder of Antoine Rose, and we've seen it all across the country, that just because charges are filed does not mean justice will be served. So make sure we keep that pressure up. Make sure Breonna Taylor's murderers are arrested and are put to prison for the rest of their life. And also reach out to your county council member and let them know how important you think the no-knock ban is and how important the less lethal force legislation is, and also the Civilian Police Review Board, which we will be revamping and reintroducing here in the next couple weeks or months. So.
Okay, so y'all heard that. Pick up your phone. If you don't know who your county council person is, hit the Googles, get it done. I thought you were showing your biceps there for a minute.
I have been working out, but that's my
I'm sorry, did they go that way? So that's actually a great segue, because I definitely want to talk to Devon about something that has also been popping up quite a bit lately, which is police officers, armed police officers in our schools. It has not even just here, but like nationwide. You know, and maybe if you don't have children or if you don't go to Pittsburgh Public, you don't even know this is a thing, but it is. So Devon, do you want to maybe take a second to talk about where we are right now versus, you know, what you and Pam are trying, you know, the new future that you're trying to envision for our students at Pittsburgh Public?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing I really want to start with is to say that our school police officers are not armed.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
My son goes to
okay.
Catholic school.
I think
they are. In other schools they are, but not in
yes, and not in Pittsburgh Public. And I think that's really important to clarify also, that we have our own school police department. We're not talking about City of Pittsburgh police as school resource officers like most districts in the country have, right? So we're seeing this huge wave of school districts across the country that are ending their contracts or, you know, removing school resource officers out of their schools that are provided by their local police department. Pittsburgh Public Schools operates differently because we have our own school police and they are not armed. There was actually a vote, I believe last year, where the school police advocated for guns, and that was voted down by the board. So that's the one benefit to this process. And so what Pam and I have been really having the conversations and kind of doing the work around is how can we reimagine how we provide school safety in our buildings. And I think that's something that this time has afforded us to be able to talk about that has never really been. We've been doing things the same way for years. And we're already having this conversation about imagining, reimagining Pittsburgh Public Schools and how we deliver education. And so I think this is also a great time for us to say, well, how are we doing safety and can we do safety different? The biggest part and why we're really trying to push to have this conversation and introducing this resolution that we're still in the process of creating and putting together. But the reason why I think this is such an important time to talk about it is because the majority of our school district in terms of students is made up of, Black kids, Black and brown kids. And oftentimes they're the highest amount of arrests are Black, brown, and disabled children. And so the arrests and citations come from, people who decide to press charges. Oftentimes, unfortunately, it is our teachers and our school administration staff that are pressing the charges. And so there's a very fine line to feel like how we really have to focus on this, because obviously we're putting in and we're investing money into our school police department and our overall school safety with security guards and police officers. But our security guards actually do so much more than just, guard the building, because they do serve as mentors. They do serve as coaches, and they live in the community. Unlike our teachers who contractually don't have to live in the city of Pittsburgh to be a teacher here, whereas most of the staff and even board do have to live within the city. So the dynamics look different. And so I think this is something that we have to be very careful and sensitive about, because there has been a great impact on our school police, that our school police and our school security guards have on our students, because they're in a very unique situation in which they live in the community. They're supportive outside of their role as a police officer or as a security guard. We're not saying that we want to get rid of security guards, because I see the value in that. And if, in fact, I think they probably deserve so much more than what they're getting, because they do so much more. I think the conversation has to be, if we're actually investing in the resources that we need to invest in, if we're investing in, restorative justice practices, if we're investing in more counselors and social workers and support staff to help students work through issues, and if we're doing that consistently, then why do we need a police officer physically to be in our school building to deal with issues or critical issues? And so I think that is where the conversation has to begin, is why have we been doing this way for all this time, and what can we be doing differently to better protect and support our students?
So wait, Devon, let me ask you a quick question. What amount of the school board budget goes towards this police? I'm assuming the school board's budget.
Yeah.
So how much money are parents spending on having their children policed and arrested versus?
It's a little over I believe it's a little over $7 million that is put into the school safety. So it's around about 20 school police officers and about 68-70 school security aides is their formal title, but we would call them security guards. And then that, other factors to, equipment and things like that, metal detectors that goes to, sometimes it goes to, towards other items. So,
but not tanks, right? I do not believe Pittsburgh school police have tanks, unlike some other police forces.
No, and I'm so glad we don't have tanks, because that's.
Can you even imagine? But
like, they're children. I don't think that, because they had a bad attitude this morning, that warrants them to be brought in.
Bring in the tanks. John is cranky today.
Also, there's something that I wanted to add based off what Devon's saying. I was reading the WESA article by Sarah Schneider, which I'm sure you all have read by now. But some of the data in this article was really interesting to me in regards to the arrests by the Pittsburgh Public School Police.
Are you referring to the 85% of the arrests were Black students?
85%.
85%.
Students arrested by PPS police last year were Black. But Black students only make up 52% of the district students. And so that's, right there, hard stop. Just looking at that, the racial disparities that make up their arrest is something that's obviously very troubling, and something that it seems really influenced this decision by Devon and Pam to really make a change here. But also something, and this goes off, what I talk about personally when it talks about the people that we're policing in general in our communities, that most of these are not actually crimes, and most of these people don't deserve to be arrested. They just need a little help. So that's the other number that I think is really fascinating in here. Only 23% of the arrests in the last year were for offenses that under state law require mandatory police involvement. So that's things that are actually crimes on the law, on the books. Only 23% of the arrests made were for actually committing those crimes. So that's like weapons charges, harassment, terroristic threats. The majority of the things that the PPS police are arresting folks for are for tobacco and having alcohol underage and disorderly conduct. So the reality is, when Devon mentions the school security guards, that's who should be handling these things, not actual, even though they're not armed. The fact that we have permitted arrest powers inside schools, to me, is something that's very, very problematic. I live in the North Hills. Our student resource officers are doing the same thing out here, and I'm pretty positive that our student resource officers are armed. And they're former police officers, and there's, again, some great folks, but still at the end of the day, why are we giving arrest powers in school? Why are we arming police in school? And I'm so glad that we have Devon and Pam on the Pittsburgh School Board who are making sure that they're speaking out and making sure that these injustices are handled properly.
Yeah, and Devon, going back to the Sarah Schneider article on WESA, the district budget is $7.2 million, so you were bang on there, and 98% of that goes to salaries and benefits for the Pittsburgh Public School police force. That is a significant chunk of money. Devon, what are some ways that you think that might be better spent to better help our students?
So one of the biggest things, and I say, we're going to talk about remote learning at some point. But
I still have trauma, Devon. I still have trauma. But go ahead.
And that's exactly what I'm about to say, right? A lot of our students are going to be coming back with, even higher levels of trauma than what they were dealing with before COVID-19, and we have to be, as a school district, we have to be prepared to deal with that. The answer can't be arrest students when they, flip out or go crazy. And I think that is, I think, one of the conversations. For me, I'm, a big advocate for restorative justice work. It's proven that it supports and helps students better. It helps them work through their issues. A lot of times what I see, and this is just from my experience working with students, is that they don't know how to deal with their issues. They don't know how to deal with their anger or their frustration or the things that they're going through emotionally, and they're going through so many different changes in life. And so when they come into school, the last thing that they're thinking about is what's going on in English class. They're worried about where did I sleep last night? Am I going to get a good meal today? Like, am I going to have somewhere to sleep tonight? I remember having a conversation with a student, and, he was like on the verge of getting kicked out of class because he was being disruptive. And the conversation I had with him, he told me like 2 nights ago, his mom kicked him out the house, and he's just been like struggling ever since. And so our kids are coming in with trauma. If we're working with them over time, and it's inconsistent, one restorative circle isn't going to solve a problem. You have to work at it. So if we can have restorative justice coordinators, if we could have even just a couple more, social workers or paraprofessionals that can be in the classroom, I think that is really going to help and support. Also, if we could invest more in the outside work that our school security is doing. I mean, they do so much, and they get paid so little. And I think that's really a part of the conversation, is how can we give them what they need, give them the tools and the support system, the supports that they need to be able to better help and support the students. So I think that redirection in how we invest in, practices and models that we know work, that we can invest in those versus just hiring more police officers or giving the ability. And I think also the biggest thing for me is there needs to be some type of moratorium on citations and charges that are pressed on our students. Like, to have that conversation, and we haven't gotten to that point yet, but when we get to that point, I'm going to be ready. because we have to ask the question, who is pressing the charges? That's a real question to have. Sometimes our school police officers, because they know the students a little bit better, they know the system a little bit better, they're able to kind of talk, magistrate judges and people into maybe we can get some lesser charges, maybe we can reduce it, but ultimately somebody has to press the charges first. That somebody usually is some type of school administrator or adult in the building, teacher or para or whoever. So that's something I think we need to be mindful of as well.
No, and do you think it's almost like a chicken and egg scenario? I mean, do you think if there wasn't a police force, and let's say the same incident happened and a security guard took care of it as opposed to a police officer, do you think those same charges would get pressed in a lot of these cases? And I know that's anecdotal, but just your thoughts on it.
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, so security guards don't have the power to arrest or do any of that. So it would look a little bit different. And again, these people have lived in the community. They have gone through their own issues and their circumstances. So they know a little bit more about the system than, you know, the average person who works in a school building who doesn't look like the kids that they're working with. So.
And so, thank you, Devon.
Bethany, wait. I have to note, that might be, and Jake can fact check me, that might be the longest you've been quiet since we started our show.
Well,
and was it so hard?
The timer went off and I had to silence it because Devon was giving us such awesome information, and I didn't want to cut it off because that's really what people need to understand, especially folks like me. I don't have kids in school, you know, and I'm not on the school board. And so when it comes to finding out about what's going on in our school, I really heavily rely on, you know, my friends that have children who go to the school and my friends who are on the school board. And so I think it's great information for our viewers who are watching who maybe don't understand, you know, what is the difference between security guard and police? Who has arrest powers? Do they have guns? You know, I really appreciate you, Devon, because I think that that's some awesome information that's so even myself was curious about. So thank you so much.
I mean, misinformation, I think, is and misunderstanding is one of the biggest challenges of this role, because everybody kind of has their own ideas and their own thoughts, but nobody actually knows.
Right.
Nobody actually knows what a school board director does.
Right. Well, now, hey, we're doing the hard work, Devon. We're getting it out there. And, I know you said you were a baby school director, but you're obviously so invested and so passionate. And the kids in District 2 and in the city of Pittsburgh are lucky to have you advocating for them. So thank you for coming on today and talking about this incredibly important issue. Obviously, a lot to watch, you know, as this winds its way through, as Bethany and Liv's legislation tries to wind its way through. You know, I'm old enough now. I feel like I could say this is such a unique time in our nation's history, and you know, you guys are on the forefront of making the changes that people want and need. So I'm going to send a little love to both of you guys right now.
We need all the love we can get.
We need it.
I'm sending it. I'm
Something
from Beachy to Deutschtown, Devon. I hope you can feel it, and like so out in the North Hill suburbs, Bethany, for you as well. So Hallam, do you want last words since you were quiet for so long?
Actually, no. I don't have last word today. I am working on myself and I'm learning to center other folks. And so I would like to hand the last word over to whoever would like to have it.
Devon, we're going to give you, our very special guest today, last word. Anything you want to talk about? You got 32 seconds. Go.
Okay. So, you know, I think we're in a crazy time right now. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to get involved and be invested. Even just in the work that Pam and I are trying to do, is trying to make it our schools better for our students. And I think that that's really important. And I think what's important also is that, you know, we do not always get it right. Remote learning, we didn't get it right.
We didn't get to talk about that. We're going to do a whole other stuff about that.
But I'm going to put it in my last words. We didn't get it all right. And I think this is lessons learned. Nobody expected that, you know, we would be in a pandemic, that we would be confined to our homes, that we would have to educate our own children, that we would have to, you know, do things that we never have done before. And now we're in this very crazy space of now what? And so I want to assure people that, you know, the district is working hard. I think community process is so important. Community input is so important. And that is what we're doing to reopen our schools. That is what we're doing to address this issue of police in our schools, is bringing in the community and hearing the voices of the people. And I think as a person like myself in a role that is to support and be the voice of the people, I think it's important that we have to listen. And that is something that historically we don't do. You know, people get into roles to be politicians and to play the game. And I think at some point we have to say enough is enough and real work has to be done. And so that's what I'm really excited to be able to do. That's what I'm proud to see Bethany and Liv doing on county council. And I think as we get more progressive, younger people, you know, going after board seats, going after council seats, I think we're really going to start to see the changes that we need to be making to really make this, you know, city and country great for real. For real.
That is for real.
Make America great again.
That's a great last word. our recent primary election gives me a little bit of hope. So Devon Taliaferro, thank you again for joining us. District 2 School Board Director, Midwife Community Outreach Director, is that?
Community Engagement Coordinator. I mean, but all the same, just trying to bring another spotlight, which is probably a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, go off a whole midwife podcast.
And all that.
I drank the Midwife Center Kool-Aid a long time ago. But thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. Bethany, it's always such a pleasure to see you.
And the pleasure is all mine, Bethany.
Oh, you stop, you. From us to you, from us allergy sufferers to you, the general public, who might also be suffering from allergies. Thank you for watching. Make sure you sign up if you haven't yet for your digital copy of Pittsburgh Current, hot and fresh in your inbox every Tuesday. And I'm going to end it there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.